Okay, thanks. I'm Steve Wright. I work at Lancaster University as a learning technologist. And I first came to encounter network learning from working with David McConnell, Gail Parkoma, and Maria Czerniewicz when we were setting up the PhD Technology Enhanced Learning Programme. I liked the term. I read one of the books, and I was really kind of intrigued and entangled into it, especially by the work of Steve Fox, with a focus on informal learning, which opened up a lot of ideas and interests for me. Something I've not seen as much focus on recently. It feels as if official learning spaces have maybe colonised that. It's almost MOOCs have kind of colonised informal learning. And I think there is still a space for us to look at. It's fascinating to talk about Ravelry and just how amazing Ravelry is as an informal learning space that doesn't say you've got to start then, enrol, you've got 10 weeks, and you haven't finished your knitting. And I think that we've still got a lot to learn from informal learning. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm Petar Jandric for the University of Applied Sciences in Zagreb, Croatia. I'm a newcomer to network learning, so 2 years ago in Edinburgh with my first NLC. I think that I actually entered the field of learning by accident, of network learning by accident, meaning that I've been working quite a lot and for quite a long time in fields that could be called e-learning, digital learning, technology-enhanced learning. And at one point, actually, I found out about this community, and I found out that that many things that I have been actually working before are network learning. So I joined the community. I found here some really great theories and some also really supportive people, and I continued my work in the field of network learning, although I'm still not sure about this terminology thing. I mean, we can talk about it later, but for now, yeah, I've been actually doing network learning before I knew about network learning and what network learning was. I think this is the most important thing, because I believe that there are many people out there who also do network learning without being aware of the existence of network learning in a way that we define it here within this community.
So Mike Johnson, I've been knocking about this conference for quite a while. I think I could have come to the 2002 conference, and I probably should have. And I think I just didn't feel like it was good enough, actually. But I probably was, and should have just come anyway. I was doing a sea salt masters in Lancaster at that time. There's Hilary and one or two others still know from that course, which was very useful. And there's some great tutors involved in that, and also very important to the conference. And so they really drew me into their attending in 2004. So I still have the badge. I don't have a T-shirt. I didn't put a T-shirt on. Yeah, I've been just delighted to be involved in a conference which takes learning technology seriously, but also all the contextual factors around that, and takes it requires empirical work and good critical work, and that's unfortunately still fairly rare. Although having said that, there can be critical work without it being supportive work, and referring back to the keynote of the previous conference, we were grateful to have Neil Selwyn along. I love his work, but there is a sort of there's a level of criticality there which it doesn't seem to be a supportive criticality, which I find in this conference, and it's just a wonderful place to be, and for somebody like me to grow up in.
Wow, what can I say after that? So I'm from the University of Cape Town, which is in South Africa, which is very far away, and the exchange rate is really terrible. And we get funding to come to the conference once every second year, unless you get invited and paid for. So the question of which conference to go to gets a lot of attention in the circles that I move in. And I always recommend network learning. I feel like I'm a poster child, But I really like this conference for the reasons that Mike just said, actually. I think it's a serious, critical space that manages to be supported at the same time. Because I get quite frustrated with research that is critical for the sake of being critical and is clever, but actually doesn't end with, so what do we do? How do we actually engage with this? And how does this interface with practice? So this link between theory and practice that is happening all the time is incredibly valuable. I also like the fact that it is, I know it's generally in the UK, not always, but I think it's generally in the UK. I like the fact that it's broader than the UK. So I like at least the European connections. I like the fact that not everyone is a first language English speaker. I think that's really important actually in terms of extending diversity. I know this year there was an attempt to get a keynote speaker from somewhere outside of the global north, and I really value that, and I don't feel that it's been done in a tokenistic, patronizing way. And so those things are really important.
I'm not going to talk a lot. I came into the field, like many others, you discover this field, and wait a minute, those people are doing just what I'm doing. This is such fun. So I started working in social network analysis area, looking at virtual community, socio-technical, how does the technology relate to the social. And then when I was at the University of Illinois for 14 years, and they had an online distance program, one of the earliest ones there. And I was, okay, here's a nice virtual community, I can capture them for research. And I always thought I was still doing virtual community. And Richard Andrews invited me to do the handbook of e-learning research with him, and I said, oh, I guess I am doing e-learning. But from e-learning, we were always trying to expand the idea of what e-learning is. But network learning is where I came to the network learning conference because it had connections to the internet research. People understand the socio-technical, they understand the computer-mediated communication effects. And at the moment, what I find really good here is there's such strong theory brought into the papers here. This is an academic rather than a practice. Well, there's practitioners as well, I don't mean to say that, but it's just fun to have that academic aspect to it here, and I think that's very, very strong here. And the other part of that is that you're also drawing from outside. There isn't a network learning canon of writing, I don't think. So you're constantly drawing from outside, so this is a very living field, constantly growing with the changes that are happening. So that's what I noticed today.
Yeah, thank you. I think all the comments really resonate well with how I feel that I'm related to network learning. And I think the notion of definitions and connected terms, I think this morning there was a symposium about exactly those kind of questions. I think that resonates a lot with all of us, and I think personally I think it's very nice that network learning is sort of a neutral term in a way, and you can apply it to the context in which you can make it useful for your own research, and therefore also enrich the dialogues that we all have together within the space of the conference. A question from that was emailed to us by the audience goes on a little bit on what Laura was saying in terms of distance and where we are and where the conference will be. And the question was, why are we all convening here in a real physical space, if you like, where there's so much network learning happening sort of in virtual spaces? And I think that's quite an interesting question, and I think we also try to do something about it in terms of the hot seats and things like that. But yeah, do we need to come to Lancaster, for example? Do we need to have a real space to hold the conference, or should we just abandon that? Maybe that's part of the question. So maybe one of you would like to reflect on that.
I can jump in on the challenges of Lancaster. I don't know if anyone tried to follow my hot seat where I was not there. Because we had been flooded and had no power, no electricity, and I had no internet at all for the entire week, and got to come in and say, yeah, that topic of the importance of materiality. Job done.
You could have done it better.
But I think there is something that we all know, that the technologies have enabled connections to happen. And some of those connections can be really powerful and really useful and give you the time and the space to read and reflect and engage. And I think there is a space for that, but there is also something that, you know, a lot of it is about compensating for not being able to come together. And so if you can come together, it's great. What I do wonder is whether there is a space to also broadcast, webcast, actually say for those who can't afford to come, then I don't think there are a lot of people who go, oh well, I'm not going to go if I can. But I think there are a lot of people who would really like to engage more than just through a Twitter stream. So I think there is some scope there for recognising that the technologies can enable us to reach more broadly, that we should perhaps be engaging with, but that doesn't invalidate the fact that you get to sit and chat and talk and actually have this dialogue face to face that you can't replace. Everyone knows that Skype it's just not the same.
I like that example of Sean Bain, where they had the ceremony at the end, the degree ceremony, where they had this in Second Life in parallel. Maybe that's something we can think about. Somebody else would like to?
Well, I would like to emphasize that network learning is not equal to digital learning. So network learning predates the computer. So we did have networks and we did have network learning before we had computers. Okay, things happen in a different way, and technology allows us to do things that we couldn't do before, and also it raises up the scale in the ways that cannot be done face to face. But basically, the notion of the network and the notion of network learning, in my understanding, is not something that is necessarily digital. And this meeting, biannual meeting, Thomas and I had just a discussion last night about it, that it's actually very good that the conference is biannual because there is enough time to build up some argument and enough time to, you know, and this meeting every second year and building up networks in a physical space, building up networks altogether is really important because, as you said, it just gives a certain quality that digital networks cannot give us. So yeah, I think it's important to have both, and it's not an either-or question. It's a question of complementarity. It's a question of enriching one with another. But it's not a question of why should we meet here or there. I think we should meet everywhere, perhaps at the same time as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that as part of the doctoral program that I'm on, we're required to come to residentials the first year and the second year, and then it's up to you whether or not you organise your own residential following up from that. But I know the social justice PhD made a positive decision not to meet up, because then everybody else is on the same footing, as it were. And it's a really sticky problem, because if you decide to meet up in Second Life or something like that, is that as good as? Probably not. Are we moving into a stage in virtual reality where you're able to trick your brain that you really are in the same physical space as somebody else? And, these kind of technologies are starting to really ramp up the extent to which you can fool your brain into thinking you really are on that roller coaster. And so it'll be interesting to see how much resolution or definition, fidelity there is between actually meeting up.
So I'm very clear in my mind that we need to meet physically. I wasn't going to say in real life, but we all know real life happens online too. But in fact, I think we need to be doing more in this conference. We pay a lot of attention in online spaces to enabling participation, and I'm concerned that we're not paying enough attention in this physical conference to enabling participation, and that we're actually running a remarkably conventional format for people who are really interested in learning design. So I was really sorry to miss the session this morning where I believe there were actually small round table, intense discussions and arguments. And I think we need to be having a lot more of those, and with people we don't know. It's great to have a community to join, but we want others to join it too, and I think we need to actually design for that.
Well, I always enjoy the face-to-face. I think there is something different you get from it. But if you think of it as is either the way that you begin to make connections with people, it's either an entry, or it's that multi-layered. So this is the top of the connection. Make connections through other ways, and then this one ends up being the multiplexity of ways of meeting. So I think I would also say we need a little bit more over the year, as you're saying. But I'm saying for the year, a bit more connection. I mean, if we just stick the hash NLC on everything on this year, then we can all find it. So I'm trying to propose the idea of hashtags as latent tie structures. So prove me right.
Well, thank you. Thank you also for the great suggestions. It seems to me that where probably still is a question. And we have been talking on and off as well about, okay, what can we do in between the 2 years, between the conferences and how we can keep things alive. And I think we need to design like those kind of ideas, but also we need to have then the engagement from people to actually maintain certain activities, well, like the hashtag, for example. There's nobody that says now you have to stop using the hashtag, for example. It's just out there in a way. But I think we're going to send out an evaluation form asking people for some further suggestions and ideas for involvement, engagement, ideas how we can deal with this locality of stuff. And so yeah, please do. I'm not sure is there any response from the audience on this question, or on response from the panel that you would like to open up on? Otherwise, no.
I think I was just going to say that in the intervening period, the year between, what I tend to try and do in my place is hold a network learning event, branded that way, in order to try and I was very grateful to invite Sue Tinnis, who you might have met at this conference before, and so I think even the sort of in-between year does give an opportunity for doing something which pushes the brand a little bit further.
Well, we have been thinking also about having kind of spin-off network learning events at other places in the world, for example, or try to. Somebody yesterday said you could have maybe workshops or events at other conferences, but have it particularly on sort of a network learning workshop. Those are things we can do to also but make sure that we make people know that what we are doing, what we are about, and stuff like that, but also to widen engagement in a way. But we haven't really been around to setting it up, so there's also time and space in that respect. So I would see this as an open call to people as well, see if you can get involved in these kind of activities, just do it, set it up. You can let it know through the network learning conference spaces as well. So I think there are many opportunities to extend this idea and keep the conversation going. Personally, I also like the idea of having a 2-year space for the conference itself, because if it's every year, you tend to know the presentations already. You have now time to develop your research, to develop your thinking, and I think that really enriches the quality of our papers. That's my opinion. Let me just see if there's another question from the audience from yesterday. Oh yeah, that goes on not so much about the place of where, but more like who is the network learner, and what are our implicit assumptions about this learner, and do we cater for this learner through our research? That's very interesting. So who is the learner? What are our assumptions about this learner? And do we cater for this learner through our research? I guess maybe that is related to our design. Do we develop designs for this learner? Quite a later question, I suppose. Maybe the one we will maybe elaborate a bit on it, or
can we call a friend?
Somebody wants to comment. So who do we think the network learner is? Maybe we should start.
I think this is one of those ones again where I find the difference between the informal learning setting, where you really see network learning just happening because people go in and find a network, like Ravelry, like the homebrew forums that I've followed, like these other spaces where people want to learn something and they go in, and then others who have expertise go in and participate, and they share things and they learn other things. Somebody they don't know tries something out, they're interested, they say how. And you actually see this incredible spirit of what I think of as a very kind of pure network learning, of people dropping in, dropping out, very loose loose connections. And something seems to happen, possibly at the point that you charge £9,000 a year, to that you go, right, we've got to stick a fence around this. Actually, let's make it a wall. Let's make it very hard. So I think that in those terms of who are the learners, or are we talking within institutions? And the barriers that seem to be erected between institutions and extra-institutional learners seem to me to be almost getting higher. And the phrase MOOCs, they're not very open. And they do seem to have taken, to me, some of the worst aspects of formalised learning. Start date, end date, pay to participate, pay to get a certificate, and grafted them in, tried to force them into, and yet advertise it as informal learning. And what you end up with is, I don't know, stale, pale males on a stage going, brilliant, I can broadcast to 4,000 people instead of just 200 undergraduates. And you end up sort of reinforcing a lot of the existing power structures we have, rather than maybe the university looking at spaces where people are learning lifelong skills and exchanging them in a much more open way. How do we deconstruct that? I don't know. But I do think there is something about that idea of informal spaces and informal connections that we still really need to learn from and look at where people just go, I learned so much from, rather than I did a student evaluation.
Go ahead.
I'll try to see let's see what the voice will do. I think it's a great question about who is the network learner. I think for a long time it's been the self-motivated, self-starting learner, the hunter. I think we've reflected that in our research and where we're beginning to say what are the responsibilities of the learner. So we're even more giving over saying this is a person who has to be doing it themselves, has to be able to motivate themselves. And then we can have a peer-to-peer interaction. So well, I think this works for self-motivated, highly educated people. I'm wondering where it works on another for others who are more difficult learning. I think there were a few papers that I didn't get today about different kinds of populations, but I think perhaps Laura can respond as well. I mean, if you don't know how to learn, there was an article I read recently in Pollock et al. About teaching. I think it's in a traditionally African American university, and the online teacher became also the teaching coach on how to learn. So I think it's another layer of the network learning. What are all the very parallels we have? So I think we can go further on that.
Yeah. I wanted to pick up on that, and I also wanted to push you a little bit, Mike, because I think there's a real danger in this. Isn't it lovely and self-motivating and very hunky-dory? And I mean, we have to be very careful that discourse makes it very easy for government funding to say, we don't need to spend any money on this. We don't need systems in place to enable, support, scaffold, provide all the things that we know need to be in place. Because, you know, it's a bit like mental health. We can just close down the asylum, so we can just close down the schools. De-schooling. Everyone can go online and find what they need. I mean, I think we have to be really cautious around the kind of class dimensions. And then the other danger about this, you know, we're all sort of sitting here in a room, I presume, sharing certain kinds of values. But the network learner for the world, for the commercial world, is a global market. And what we have now, which we just didn't have before, is learners everywhere. And that's, you know, that's really an opportunity in some ways, but it's also really scary. So I think we have to be really cautious around whose responsibility it is to provide education and teaching, and keep that link between learning and teaching, and systems and individuals.
I think that learning also tries to valorize good scholarship and I don't know how we can ever turn around the assessment-driven mantra with individualised assessment-driven mantra. We've been talking about that for an awful long time, but I don't know really what we can do about it, aside of some kind of revolution. Do our universities actually work to promote that? I'm not convinced. Really, to what extent our students would sign up to network learning? They should do. These are good values. These are good principles, but I'm not really sure that our students sign up to that.
No. How would you?
Looking at the level of the community, I think that we should also face some facts which are maybe not so comfortable for us, but basically we are, in this room, we have an elite privileged group of people who are dealing with other elite privileged groups of people. So for instance, there's a lot of talk about the MOOC, and how many? 70% of people who actually participate in MOOCs already have high education degrees. So I think that it's important to understand, to be self-reflexive a bit, not in a bad sense, not to say that we are here to colonize whatever, do something wrong, but actually to raise self-awareness of who the community is, with whom the community works. And actually, as you said, for instance, we should maybe reach out in some other countries, or maybe we should invite speakers from the other places other than the global north. I definitely think that the community should look into itself in the same way that we look at the very concept of network learning, and we inquire and play with the definitions of network learning. I believe that we should also inquire who we are, what we are doing, and actually what is our position within the larger systems of power and larger systems of meaning. And it's not just about class, as you said, Laura. It's also about race. It's also about the differences between the global south and the global north. It's also about colonialism, which can be technological as well. And it's also about various other things where we should actually be careful to position ourselves carefully in order to be really open, and not just open to people who are similar to us, but like truly open in the meaning of the word open.
Yeah, thank you. I think in terms of openness and who the learner are, I think it's not all about education per se as the education institution. I think your point about the informal learning, learning happens everywhere, all the time, in different kinds of networks, large and small, and sort of this morning again, it was, we tend to focus a lot on the MOOCs, for example, but the term LOOCs came up. It was like what was it, small or local, what was it? But anyway, not like the massive, but more like small kinds of networks and how they are learning. And for me personally, I think it's also very nice to look at two social networks that are not necessarily so heavily online or need online facilitation, but just try to understand how social networks works in an organization or between small groups and things like that. For me, that's also network learning in a way. And if you think about who the network learner is, that's a bit of a different type maybe of network learner, and it requires also a different kind of design in relation to, if you think about it in terms of formal education. So there are different kind of structures, different kind of ways of supporting and thinking about network learning. I think that is very important to take into account here. And the different question, I'm not quite sure how we do it on time here, but one of the questions was, could the panel members tell us or share with us sort of the highlights of the 2016 conference and what they may have learned or thoughts that they may take away from this conference?
Well, we had a chance to prepare for this one, so that's I'm going to have to apologise for the metaphor. Metaphors come up rather a lot, but for me the absolute highlight was Laura and Helen Beetham. For me, going with game hunting, which is a terrible metaphor, but actually going for the social justice, the power structures, and the way that academic life is changing and who is being excluded and where the wealth and the power is going, and how these concerns seem to be very absent from some of the spaces that we should be trying to influence, like institutional policies on e-learning and institutional approaches to e-learning. And I thought that was, and when Carla brought up going big data hunting, it felt, and again looking at what is being done by whom in the name of big data, and whether I've heard it described as a land grab by kind of data scientists going, yeah, we can do sociology now, thank you. And so those kind of those ideas I think were really, really important, and just to remember that it is important to act, but not that those actions can be small and local, but they are worth doing, and they are worth the points when you can have some influence to say, well, where's the accessibility, where's the making things available, where's the social justice in this, a commitment to openness, to inclusivity, rather than efficiency, metrics, and all of those things. So,
well, I think you're reading my notes. I completely agree with Steve about this, because I think it's just the main highlight in terms of research focus, and it's really important. What I would like to say perhaps is that when you expand this theme a bit, then you end up in things such as open education, questions pertaining to algorithms, post-humanism, and also there was an interesting thing, quite a few papers actually mention dialogue in one form or another, and I think that dialogue is actually, when we speak about social justice and when we speak about collective well-being, then actually the first response that comes into mind is actually dialogue. So what you said, like it's not just here that we identify problems, but it also identify ways toward solutions. So I think that if we agree about social justice and collective well-being, I think that one of the important responses to this that came out was the importance of dialogue, and I think that it's really important, and it's really a message that I would like to take forward.
Yeah, I found the keynotes very inspiring, and in particular, I think Sean's, both of them definitely, but if you wanted to say one thing, it's about Sean's sense of adventure in terms of research, in as much as, here's something that's extremely fraught and tricky to research, the stuff about Yak and so forth, ethically problematic. That doesn't mean to say that there might not be a good way of working out how you could still do something meaningful and useful within that. So I found that inspiring to take away personally.
So the thing I really enjoyed about this particular conference has been the prevalence of metaphor. It's been fabulous. I mean, through the keynotes, which just set the tone, but it seems that every session I went to, there were interesting metaphors. I'm looking through my notes now. There were all the water metaphors, there was the land grab stuff, there was the hunting, there was lots of gleaning, there's been lots of growing, and it's been incredibly visual, actually. I kept imagining a kind of visual representation of this conference, and you know how you get those wonderful people who draw their way through the conferences? If we had one of those, they would have had rich pickings.
Well, I must agree also, I thoroughly enjoyed Sean's keynote, and particularly this idea of becoming, which I heard not just there, but she said how space is becoming, but a couple of other people have said the becoming, and the activity, the action of that, the development of that, I think is in keeping with network learning, that is growing and changing. The other thing I love is how many references I wrote down. So it's given me a wonderful set of things to go and read, and mainly the papers that you've already submitted are on my list. So.
Before I ask the final question, I was wondering, is there someone in the audience who maybe still has a question to ask to the panel, or a discussion, or a topic to raise that you may want to? I guess it's. what's the end of the call? Oh, sorry, that's fine. I'll just clock you.
Thank you. And thanks to all panelists for your thoughtful comments. A conversation that began in our symposium this morning was about the perception of a canon of network learning. This is also a discussion here on Twitter. So one of the questions I brought into this panel was, what is the possibility of opening this network learning body of research, the perceived canon, more fully, perhaps as openly licensed resources or in other ways, because many of us are intentionally using open education resources in our teaching. And if the network learning canon, such as it is not available in that way, then we cannot use it in our teaching very easily.
Can I just say that one of the things that attracted me to the conference and why I would publish, as it were, in the conference is because of the proceedings have always been open. They're talking full papers. It's not just a scrap of an abstract that you can maybe able to find if you look really hard for it. But even the original conference is open, and so I would choose to publish here where I couldn't publish openly anywhere else. Although that's changing a little bit these days. But so that was a real attraction for me originally from the conference.
Do you mean the papers or also other materials?
I mean everything, and I'm just wondering about the specific licensing as well. I know they're available online, but I'm asking about the specific licensing.
Somebody else wants to comment on
I think again for me, I found the idea that the conference proceedings are open is a really, really important, very, very useful thing. I wish they were perhaps rated and respected as highly as I think the quality that there is in them, but because there does seem to be a perception of it's like, well, if it's not in a X quality of closed journal, it doesn't count for academic promotion or academic consideration or so on, and I think that's sad. Whereas within computer science, which we are not a million miles away from, conference proceedings would be held in a very, very high esteem. And I think there's something there about saying, no, these network learning papers, do cite them, do make sure they are considered as real, they are really well-developed body of papers that are openly available.
Maybe another question from the audience? Yeah.
Hello. Based on the conference, what new research questions have arrived, and which goes beyond the state of the art?
You just asked the final question for me. I guess it's right. So maybe that's a good way to wrap things up. I mean, we've been looking into the past, but maybe as an outlook towards the future. Indeed, your question I think is very good. So, what are the research questions you would like to take away, indeed, and what are some new theoretical notions or theoretical ideas that you want to or see emerging, perhaps? So, questions or theories or both. Yes.
I was quite surprised that nobody picked up legitimation code theory at all, and this is something that Carl Mayton's worked on with Bernstein and Bourdieu, and we'll probably see a little bit more. Sorry.
Yeah.
So legitimation code theory is something that Carl Mayton has picked up from Bourdieu and Bernstein, and there's quite a fermented work on that in Sydney. Some in South Africa as well, and about the place, and it does seem that knowledge is something that's not just going to be vilified as equating to power, to quote him in his research. And I just wonder whether that might play into some insights that we could get from that learning perspective.
Try one here. Partly inspired by some of the comments here. One of the other areas of inquiry that's related is distributed knowledge, and the concept of different ways of knowing. And that goes into the two-way learning. I think there was somebody presented on how the instructors, the thing that they'd said was how much they'd learned from their students. And I think to pursue that a bit more, find out what it really means distributed knowledge means, if we're really going for participatory culture and network learning. I think there's network knowledge building, which is talked about already. So perhaps there's a way to bring in some of those ideas about knowledge into the research as well.
That's probably a good moment for me to pick up, because one of the things that I'm trying to think about is how do we link network learning to curriculum, and that's obviously connected to notions of knowledge and which knowledge counts and how it's expressed, and how do you do that in a networked global world. And it's particularly pertinent in just picking up on what Peter was saying. There are student movements that are really pushing for decolonizing the curriculum. And that does not happen in isolation, it happens in a very globalized world. And the narrow view of that would be Africanize the curriculum, but that's the narrow view. I think it's actually much more complex. And I would like to see that picked up as an issue that is not just a concern to particular people protesting, but as a much broader question. And then the other area that I think we need to be paying attention to, because sometimes I feel like we're frogs in hot water and we haven't noticed what's happening around us, is the increasing commercialization of the sector and the extent to which, we say this, it's kind of like in your introductory slide, but actually it's happening around us in quite profound ways. And when you talk about who you're working with and who your partners are and who the stakeholders are, and it's got to do with unbundling of higher education, of course. You take every single aspect of what we do, from assessment to plagiarism management, to writing support, dial a tutor, to all of those aspects. What is it actually doing to the teaching and learning experience, let alone to the public mission of education? And I really feel that's something we need to be paying seriously concerted attention to.
Well, for me, it's actually very similar. Thanks a lot, Laura, for this. I think that network learning should definitely embrace its political nature, because it is political. It's not just a cold theory of networks. It's also learning. It's also about human beings. It's also about human relationships. It's also about social relationships. And I think that network learning indeed needs to embrace this political nature and explore it in various different ways, from decolonizing, student protests, but also in relation to knowledge production and knowledge dissemination, which basically brings me to probably the biggest theme. I mean, if you look at the theme of this conference, which says looking back and moving forward, and if I wanted to describe network learning with one word, which is not network and which is not learning, I would probably describe it with the word openness. And actually openness has so many meanings, and openness has so many implications in the creation of knowledge, in dissemination of knowledge, and all these things. So I definitely think that, and it's one of the themes that reoccurred constantly in various presentations and in various discussions in and around the conference, what it actually means to be open, how we can present our knowledge in an open way, from publishing our proceedings to many, many other things, and how we can actually, really, what does it mean to do truly open network learning / research maybe, but that's the story. So the concept of openness is definitely something that is important, and which of course then goes back again to the political nature of network learning.
I mean, to me, one of the quotes, which I'll probably misquote badly, was Helen Beaton talking about, we should be doing stuff. We should be doing stuff, and we should see theory as being a way of informing and serving practice rather than an end in itself. And it's great to come together and discuss theory and add isation or ology or itty to the end of a whole load of words. But there is also something about just doing rather than doingification. getting out there doing stuff, and I think that's really important. And I do think there's also a consideration about this openness, that some of the language, some of the sort of love of going into abstraction can actually put quite a lot of people off who will just go, that's not for me. It's a load of academics discussing which obtuse, impenetrable French writer they have read, and you haven't, so they look cleverer than you. Rather than, it's about network learning, it's about connecting, it's about trying to open up education, about trying to connect people together. I think one of the things that network learning has that is really powerful is that kind of clear statement of what network learning is. And it's a real, to me, that I like that phrase of a standard, but that sense of a kind of the royal standard or a standard bearer, something that you rally to, you defend, that you see as important. And there is a clear statement of network learning, but I do think that from what's been said here, and in particular from Laura and Helen's seminar, that there is scope for adding something to that to say it's about democratisation of education, it is about opening up opportunity, and that is what it is. It's about connecting people in order to do something and make the world a better place, rather than just a place where we like reading difficult French authors.